Hello, I'm Dr. Nancy Friessen. I sit on the Children's Vision Steering Committee as part of the British Columbia Doctors of Optometry. The committee has put together a presentation on children's vision, which is what we'll be talking about today. So, what are we going to be covering? A few things. Our EyeLearn program has been revamped, so we'll be covering what the EyeLearn program entails. The link between vision and learning. So before I went to optometry school, I actually also went to teachers college. So how vision and learning interact is something I'm very passionate about. So looking forward to that. And then the importance of comprehensive eye exams and differentiating between comprehensive eye exams versus vision screening. And then lastly, covering some common eye conditions and warning signs to look out for there. So what is EyeLearn? EyeLearn is a pretty cool program. So it is created by the British Columbia Doctors of Optometry. The idea is to focus on outreach and education regarding the importance of vision for learning in our children, the importance of comprehensive eye exams, and lastly, screen time as well, which we'll be covering towards the end of our program. So we're increasing awareness among teachers, allied health professionals, and the general public. We are hoping to get information and education regarding screen time recommendations, habits, and then just healthy visual development as well. And then the importance of virtual learning, especially since COVID has hit. And virtual learning is going to be staying with us even after COVID continues to quiet down. I think it's one of those things that we will need to learn how to manage well going forward. So the link between vision or learning, we're going to play a fun little game here. It's called Myth or Fact. So myth or fact? Too much blinking is a sign of an eye problem. Myth or fact? It's actually a fact. Blinking is a common sign of eye problems. It can be a multitude of them. Could be blurred vision, could be an infection, could be light sensitivity. If your child or a student in your classroom is blinking more than you think they should be, or especially if they're rubbing their eyes, that's another common one. Recommend that they come in to see an optometrist. We can find the underlying reason why that's happening. And then myth or fact, second round. So this is a scenario. Jordan is 2 years old. He's too young for an eye exam. He can't identify letters yet. Is that myth, or do you think that that's true? That's actually a myth. So vision tests and exams use symbols and pictures in addition to letters. We can also use techniques that are completely objective, which means that the patient, especially when they're younger, like 6 months old, they can't speak yet. So objective testing doesn't require a response from our patient, so that's a myth. And then another scenario here. So myth or fact? Lily will tell her parents if she can't see well. So this one's a myth. So young children usually don't know that they're seeing differently than their peers. And so they're not going to walk up to you and say, hey, mom or dad, or, to their teacher, I can't see as well as Sally sitting beside me. They don't know what they're missing. So that's a myth. And so the effects of poor vision on reading and writing, that's a common one that we think of. This is an example here on this next slide of poor vision on reading and writing. So you can see there on the one side, it's very disorganized writing. The spacing isn't accurate. It's slanted off to, the writing is slanted off to one side. And so that's the before treatment side. And then on the after treatment side, so 3.5 months of treatment, they're able to write their letters more legibly, so you can read them better. They're in a straighter line. They're similar sizes. There's still some capitals and some lowercase letters there, but it's definitely an improvement from what's on the left. So what type of treatment are we curious? So sometimes it can be something as simple as glasses. Other times it's vision therapy, which will be getting into what that is. So here's a few did you know that's, or a few fun facts. So did you know that 80% of children's learning involves vision and visual processing? So it's not just the clarity of the vision, but it's also the neurological processing behind our vision that contributes to learning. So 80% of how we learn is actually based on vision. Second one, so 1 in 4 school-aged children has an undetected vision problem. There's a large number of children that don't come in to see an optometrist in the province before they start kindergarten. So these children are starting kindergarten with an undiagnosed vision problem, and so they're not able to participate in their learning experience fully because their vision is not necessarily clear, or sometimes clear and not always clear, so intermittent blurry vision, or they're just having a lot of eye strain, so they can see clearly, but they're having to spend a lot of effort on getting that clarity, so their ability to process and understand and comprehend what they're learning isn't as good as it could be. Another one, so children rarely complain of vision problems. So since they don't realize that they're seeing their world differently than others, again, just highlights that idea of, a child isn't going to be able to tell you that their vision's blurry or isn't comfortable. And then vision problems can often be mistaken for developmental issues such as dyslexia or ADD or ADHD, can even be autism. And in British Columbia currently, when those types of assessments are done, a vision assessment is not necessarily always part of that process. Sometimes parents will remember to check their vision, and often audiology or hearing also comes into that, but it's not a standardized part of that program at the moment. So moving on to the importance of comprehensive eye exams and what the difference is between vision screening and a full eye exam done by your optometrist. So vision screening versus a comprehensive eye exam. We as optometrists do a lot more testing in regards to depth perception, color vision, ocular health. If you look at the photo on the side, or on the left side there of the screen, you'll see different things that your child might be seeing in terms of what a sentence can look like. That first one there is just an out of focus sentence altogether. That means likely that your child is farsighted, so that would be corrected by using glasses. The second one there is almost looks like a hazy second or a double image there. That would likely be some uncorrected astigmatism. It could also be a visual inefficiency. So sometimes the eyes want to diverge. So instead of them being able to converge and focus on the letters in a book, for example, they won't be able to converge as much as they need to, and it creates almost like a second double there at times. The third one is a wavy line. So a wavy line could be something retinal. So that's ocular health related. So that's an issue inside the eye, at the back of the eye, which again, your optometrist would assess. And the last one there is some letters that are mixed up. So that's more of a neurological concern. So sometimes that is dyslexia and the child does see clearly. And sometimes that is a visual perceptual concern where they might have some issues learning directionality, or laterality. So left versus right, up versus down, front versus back. If a child has concerns around their ability to learn direction or left from right, they're more likely to flip their letters. And that touches more into the visual perception side of things. So a vision screening is not a substitute for a full eye exam. It does not replace going to the eye doctor. We do appreciate our vision screeners that go into schools. They do catch bigger concerns, and we often see children that come in from a vision screening, but it's important that you get an eye exam done by an optometrist as it does a more thorough check. Vision screenings don't generally check for eye health issues, eye coordination. So eye coordination would again be that divergence versus convergence and their eye's ability to do that. Or the ability to change from looking at things far away, for example, like a smartboard or a blackboard, down to looking at something up close, like what they're trying to write down or copy down on their piece of paper. Sometimes the capacity to switch from distance to close isn't there, and again, a vision screening isn't going to check for that. A vision screening is better than nothing, I will say that. However, it's not as thorough. So this slide here just highlights that it can give us a false sense of security to have a vision screening done. So coming into an optometrist is important. We generally recommend eye exams once a year, starting from the ages of 2 to 18 years old. They are generally covered by your medical services plan. We'll get into that a little bit more. And earlier exams, younger than 2 years of age, again, we'll get into what the recommendations there are in a few minutes. So how often should a kid have an eye exam? So it's right on the next slide here. So babies, we generally recommend their first eye exam anywhere within 6 months to a year old. And again, those exams are usually a lot more objective. So we're not asking for responses from your little one. We're just doing objective testing. So we have a few handheld tools that help us determine whether your child is nearsighted or farsighted. We have a few, again, actually head-mounted tools that help us look into their eyes. And they don't need any response. They just need to be able to focus on a light. We're just checking for things like their eye coordination, whether they're developing in terms of their farsightedness and their astigmatism, or any sort of glasses prescription at the rate that we want them to be. Between the ages of 2 and 3, we start doing annual exams, so just once a year, and then ages 3 to 18, again, just once a year, more often at times, depending if there's any concerns. Then again, your doctor of optometry will be able to tell you if you need to be able to, or if you need to bring your child in more often than that. So these next few slides just highlight where on the important spectrum vision currently stands. So a lot of us parents are concerned about our children's mental health, of course, which is important, proper nutrition. And then a little bit further down the list there, you have vision health. So our job with the Children's Vision Steering Committee is to try to have every child get into a Doctor of Optometry for an exam before they start kindergarten, before they start learning. Ideally at 6 months, but definitely before we're starting kindergarten. So that just kind of gives you an idea as to where we kind of put vision screening or vision health in our priorities as parents. This next slide here gives an idea of a parent's awareness, or sometimes teachers' awareness of symptoms or poor vision health among children. Reading difficulties, if a child is having trouble at school with reading, we are aware that, it might be their eyes and might not be able to see clearly. Frequent headaches, of course, I get that a lot as a doctor. A 6, 7-year-old comes in and mom's saying, oh, she's been complaining about headaches a lot, so we thought we'd come in. Poor grades in school, sometimes they are good at English and not so good at math, and I still see those kids as well. Slower learning in general can be another one. Dizziness or motion sickness, so that's usually they're getting their eyes and ears checked, because our vision and our balancing system in our ears collaborate to avoid dizziness and nausea. Some of those lower ones there, poor handwriting can also sometimes be a trigger for getting an eye exam done, and on and down the list. So what's covered for eye exams for children in British Columbia in terms of financial coverage? So eye exams for children aged like 0 to 18 are a benefit of MSP, or what's the medical services plan. So as long as your child has a services card, a part of their exam or all of their exam will actually be covered by their services card, depending on the clinic. Certain clinics choose to charge what's called a copay, so there might be a small fee there, but there are many clinics in the province that don't charge anything other than what the MSP card covers, so there's no cost to the parent in that regard. And again, a child doesn't have to be able to recognize letters, so as long as they're able to look at a light, anytime after 6 months is a good time to come in. So what are you going to know as a parent after your child's eye exam? Your doctor will review a few things during the exam, and they'll give you a summary at the end of the exam. So they're going to check to make sure that the eyes are healthy and that the eyes are coordinating well. So whether your child's eyes are able to cleanly track. So let's say I'm looking at my finger over here and I'm able to track it following with my eyes moving, instead of just having my full head move and my eyes not having to move at all. Or is their vision jumping as they're tracking an object? So would they able to smoothly track a train or a car driving by, or does that cause strain for them? Another thing that we check is color vision. That's a pretty easy test. It's just being able to know shapes or numbers. They can even trace if they're too shy to tell us the numbers. Good depth perception. That's a fun little game. We have them put on 3D glasses, and they're generally identifying shapes, or they're pushing little circles into a book. So that's a fun one for them to play. It's almost a game. Whether their eyes can focus well. So that could be checking for nearsightedness, farsightedness, astigmatism. Can also check for their ability to, again, focus from things up close to things far away. And then whether your child ultimately needs glasses or whether they would benefit from vision therapy. So the sooner that we detect eye conditions, the earlier we can treat them, and the better your child is able to participate in their day-to-day life and learn well. So common children's eye conditions, and this is not necessarily children, it also applies to adults, and then a few common warning signs in kids though. So I get these questions all the time. What is nearsightedness? What is farsightedness? What is astigmatism? We're about to go through that. So before we do that, we're going to run through a few warning signs. So warning signs in children, if they have blurry or double vision, that's not something they're necessarily going to be able to tell you. Sometimes, you do have a child that says, sometimes I see two. Like a few weeks ago, I had an 8-year-old, it was a Saturday, and he came in and he says, yeah, I see two all the time when I'm reading. And his dad was the one that had brought him in for an eye exam, and he says, really? You've never told me that. But for some reason, he felt that he wanted to tell me that, which I was grateful that he did. And one of the reasons that for him, the reason he was seeing double when he was trying to read is his eyes don't have good capacity to converge or to come together and focus on the book that he's trying to read. So holding objects too close to the eyes, kids sometimes when they think that if something's blurry, if they bring it closer, right? That's our natural inclination as humans to bring something closer, that will help, and sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. So if your child is bringing books really close, or if they're really sitting close to the TV, that's a warning sign. Tilting their head, so if they're tilting, or if they're kind of doing this, or if they tend to tilt back or tilt forward. Covering or closing one eye, so if your child's reading and you notice that one of their eyes is often closed, that's another warning sign. If you see their eye fully turning in, so usually in children, if their eye's going to have a turn, it'll turn in instead of out. But you do eventually, every once in a while, you do have a child that turns out as well. So if you feel as though you're looking at your child and you see one of the eyes turns, and you're like, did I see that? And then it fully realigns after a second. Trust yourself. If you felt like you saw an eye turn in or out, bring them into an optometrist. That's an important one to catch early. If your child has difficulty reading or avoiding things up close, if they're not ones to really want to do anything with their hands, that's another one. Performing below potential in general, so if they're having trouble with school, is another one. During allergy season, if they're rubbing their eyes a lot, if their eyes are tearing, if they have red itchy eyes or burning eyes, or even like a little bit of swelling around the eyelids or under the eye, that can be a sign of eye allergies. That needs to get dealt with in a fairly quick manner so that they're not rubbing their eyes all the time. Poor coordination in sports, or if your child is just one of those kids that ends up, running into the coffee table and running into the wall, or making the corner too quickly, that can be another sign that their depth perception's off. So in that case, one eye might be seeing quite clearly, and then the other eye's falling behind, so they don't have good depth perception for that reason. Again, headaches, eye strain, squinting, excessive blinking, all those things are other warning signs to look for. So, okay, on to what is nearsightedness. So nearsightedness means that you have near sight. So you can see things up close, but things further away, like the blackboard, is going to be a little bit blurrier. So this is the classic, your 7, 8, 9-year-old comes home and says, Mom, I can't see the board. And then you come in and see one of us as an eye doctor. And that's usually, it's an easy solution. Either contacts or glasses will fix that. So that's not too difficult to solve. There is a hereditary component to this. So if mom and dad have really thick glasses and they take them off to read when they get into their 40s, that's being nearsighted, and you can pass that on to your children. The eyeball itself is either too steep or the full eyeball is too long in nearsightedness, and it has a tendency to progress. So once nearsightedness starts, it has a tendency to progress, and later on in the presentation we'll cover what myopia management tools we have to slow that progression down. And then farsightedness, so that's the opposite. So you have far sight. So further away, you're clear, but then when you're trying to focus on things up close, that's when you tend to experience more blur as a farsighted person. This tends to show up earlier. So between the ages of 2 and 4 is generally when this is found in kids. And so again, this will be a child who has trouble with reading, or, their coordination, their hand-eye coordination isn't as good when they're trying to, put a shape into, like put a circle in the circle-shaped hole. In those toddler games, they'll have more trouble with that type of thing. And in farsightedness, the eye is too short itself, the whole eye is too short, or the front of the eye is too flat. With farsightedness, it doesn't have the propensity to get worse. If anything, because it's found earlier in children, it's generally found, like I was saying, between ages 2 to 4. This is something that, depending on the level of farsightedness, your child can actually grow out of all of their farsightedness or some of their farsightedness, so their glasses prescription actually decreases over time, ideally. However, that isn't always the case. Every child is different. The next one here, this next slide here, just shows a visual of, for nearsightedness, the eye is too long or the front of the eye is too steep. And then again, for farsightedness, the front of the eye is too flat or the entire eye is too short. Now, astigmatism. Astigmatism is a fun word. It starts with an A. It's not astigmatism. It's anastigmatism. It's not a disease. Everyone often thinks it's a disease, but it's not. It just means that instead of the front of the eye being too short too steep or too flat, it's more shaped like a football. So if you think of the cornea, the clear covering over the iris, instead of it being perfectly spherical, like let's say the front third of a baseball, it's actually oblong, like the front third of a football. So, and if you think of a football, there's tips to a football. So depending on which part or which direction those tips of the football land, that determines how much your astigmatism is going to affect you as well. So if the front of the eye is too steep from 12 to 6 o'clock, that's with the rule astigmatism. If it's too steep from 3 to 9 o'clock, that's against the rule astigmatism. And that means that your vertical lines are going to be more blurred. So for folks that have against the rule astigmatism, a lot of they tend to have a harder time with reading because all the vertical letters, or all the letters that have vertical lines in them, all kind of stretch and they blur into each other. So it's conveniently against the rule astigmatism is less common than with the rule astigmatism. But again, it's just corrected with glasses. So that's an easy way for your child to have a better time with reading. And then again, this is just a visualization of what happens with the eye. So instead of the front of the eye being shaped perfectly spherical, it's more oblong. With higher amounts of astigmatism, the entire eye is actually shaped like a football. So instead of it being a perfectly spherical eye, it's more shaped like a football. Now, these changes in terms of being shaped like a baseball or a football, they're not big enough to notice. Like, you're not going to be able to look at a person and say, oh, you have football shaped eyes or you have baseball shaped eyes. It's very, within a millimeter amount. So it's not something that you can physically see on the person. The next one here, so a turned eye. So strabismus is the technical term for an eye turned in or an eye turned out. Can, in less common cases, can also be an eye turned up or an eye turned down. We used to call this having crossed eyes or wandering eyes or even a wall eye back in the 80s. In this case, instead of the eyes being comfortably able to look straight ahead out when you're looking at something far away, instead of them being in parallel, one eye will be turned. So they can, like I was saying, they can be horizontal, vertical, or a combination of both in terms of the misalignment. So signs for this, if a child, again, like that 8-year-old I saw, comes in saying, I have double vision, or if they have poor depth perception, so if they're stumbling into things, they could have an intermittent strabismus, so sometimes their eyes are straight, sometimes it has a tendency to wander out. When children are tired, if that eye turn tends to be more present. So towards the end of the day, after a sports game, things like that, you'll be able to catch that eye turning a little more often as well. What is a lazy eye? So a lazy eye is a common term for something called amblyopia. So strabismus, so an eye turn, can actually cause amblyopia. So if someone has an eye that's turning in or out, the brain actually functionally starts ignoring the vision in that eye a little bit more and favors the eye that's looking straight ahead. So when the brain starts to ignore that eye more, the availability of clear vision to that eye that's getting ignored more often is not going to be as good over time. So let's say my left eye is my good eye and my right eye is the eye that's turning out, for example. My left eye is going to have clear vision, whether or not I need glasses, but there's going to be the capacity to see perfectly clear, let's say. So I would have 20/20 vision in my good eye. The eye that's wandering out, sometimes, no matter what kind of lens I put in front of it, even if it has a prescription, I put a lens in front of it, it's not going to get the same level of clarity as my left eye does. It's just going to have maybe 20/30 vision or 20/50 vision, which is actually the cutoff for driving standards. So amblyopia is something we like to catch earlier on. The earlier on we catch it in a child's development, the better the chances are of regaining vision to the level of clarity that we want. Eyes are great in the sense that we have two of them. We like to keep two of them all of our lives. Sometimes, unfortunately, we lose one. So let's say I lose my good eye. To have an eye that's quote unquote my backup eye and have it not be as clear as my good eye is a situation we try to avoid at all costs. Nobody wants to think about losing an eye, but sometimes it happens. And so we like to keep our eyes as healthy as we can, and we like to keep them both functioning as well as we can. It's also really helpful for depth perception, which we'll get into in a bit here. So what are some signs of amblyopia? So again, an eye turn, favoring one eye over another. So if your child's always closing one eye when they're reading or even just looking at things far away, if you notice them just really closing one eye, turning their head to one side. So let's say again, using the example of my left eye being my good eye, if I tend to kind of turn my head when I'm looking at you, that's another sign of it. Poor depth perception. Again, when you don't have clear vision, and the same level of clarity coming into both eyes, that decreases your depth perception. And the reason that actually happens, so we'll kind of go into the neurology of that a little bit. So we get depth perception by the image coming into the brain from the left eye and the image coming into the brain from the right eye. The visual cortex back here superimposes those two images. And so the slight differences in those images is what creates depth perception for us. Now imagine again that my right eye doesn't see as clearly as my left eye. My brain's trying to put those two images together, but it doesn't work as well. So I don't have the same level of depth perception per se as someone who has two clear eyes that are functioning well, and they've got good superimposition there, which creates good depth perception for them. Again, poor depth perception means that we're likely going to be clumsier people. So if your child is bumping into things or has issues with aim, for example, if you're playing pool with them or darts and it's just not their game, then maybe get it checked out. The next one, neurovisual deficits. So this is one that we think of less often, but neurovisual deficits can lead to misdiagnosis of learning disabilities. So again, ADHD, ADD, autism spectrum disorder, and again, 80% of those learning disabilities in Canada are actually reading based. So getting a vision exam by an optometrist is important if your child is getting assessed for those things. A significant number of children with learning disabilities also have neurovisual deficits, and it could be the underlying cause of their symptoms. So I touched on this a little bit earlier. So again, just going back to that, if your child's having trouble with learning laterality, left, right, or up and down, or front and back. I know in science we learn dorsal and ventral. And so this can create letter flipping or even word flipping. They're more prone to do those things in kids that are having trouble with that. So one of the things that we do as optometrists, and usually this is a developmental optometrist, so they tend to do more of this type of work. There are ways to teach your child how to better understand left and right, up and down, front and back. And there's all these fun exercises to do that. And part of that learning also involves your child being comfortable with their body in space, right? So being able to understand, I'm about 2 meters away from the camera right now. A child that has issues with left and right, up and down, and direction, they're going to have a harder time with that. So those exercises go into those things a little bit too, and they're fun activities. So it's a fun thing for your child to be able to do. The next slide here goes into protecting your child's eyes from the sun. So UV protection. We're so good at putting sunscreen on our kids, right? They get out of the water at the beach, put some sunscreen on again, because they put more sunscreen on because they've been in the water. Just making sure that your child has making sure that your child has sunglasses, and making sure that if you can keep a hat on them, that's a good idea as well. It's a great way to keep those UV rays from getting into the eyes. Fun fact is about 80% of our lifetime as a person, 80% of our lifetime exposure to UV happens under the age of 18. So once we get to 18, we tend to be spending more time indoors, start working or going to school on a more full-time basis. So just being aware of yes, it's great that your child plays outside. We encourage outdoor play. It's awesome, but just making sure that we have the right tools to protect them from the UV rays, and they're getting those UV rays in moderation. UV radiation is cumulative, so the more we're exposed to over our lifetime, that adds up over time. So why the concern around UV rays? Moderating how much UV protection or UV rays we get over a lifetime is important. Later on in life, it can cause earlier cataracts, usually in our 70s and 80s. UV exposure can also increase your risk of it getting macular degeneration, which is an ocular health disease. So it affects the retina, or the lining inside the eye that absorbs light. In macular degeneration, unfortunately, what happens is the central vision starts to blur, and initially you just notice bending in your vision. Over time, it takes away the central vision as it progresses, and unfortunately at this point it's irreversible. It's not something that we found a treatment or a cure for yet. At this point, our best bet in terms of mitigating the progression is to use ocular vitamins, but there's no way to regain that lost vision at this point. So just being careful of how much UV rays your child is exposed to. Photokeratitis, that's a fun word for basically a sunburn on the eye. This tends to happen in welders. Rarely it can happen in kids if they've been out on the beach without sunglasses or a hat, and it would have to be a lot, but it can happen. The next few days, the front of the eye literally starts to peel off, so it's an uncomfortable experience for a child. The front of the eye does regenerate. You just need a lot of lubrication, but ideally we don't have that happen too often. And the last two on the list there, they're just fun words to say. So pingecula is the fourth one, and then pterygium, or pterygia in plural, is the last one there. So those are just little growths that happen on the front of the eye, again caused by UV radiation exposure. If they get too big, they do need to be sometimes surgically removed in terms of, or for pterygiums anyway. Pingeculums can sometimes exacerbate dry eye because it's an elevation again on the front of the eye, or little growths on the front of the eye. That can cause increased friction, and so they can cause dry eye and discomfort. So we just try to avoid them if we can. And then the next one here, just tips to protect your child's eyes from the sun: wearing sunglasses, never looking directly into the sun, being conscious of what the daily UV index is, and then keeping out of direct sunlight if we can, or always having hats and sunglasses when we are in direct sunlight. Moving on to the next component of our presentation, we have myopia management, or basically controlling nearsightedness and trying to mitigate its progression. So when do we consider myopia management? So just because your child is nearsighted doesn't necessarily mean that we need to employ myopia management. We usually consider it when your child's glasses prescription is going at a faster rate than what's basically half a diopter a year. So your child isn't going to be able to come up to you and say, Mom, my glasses aren't as clear, and it's been about I think it's about a half a diopter. So going in at least once a year or earlier, if your child says, you know what, Mom, my glasses aren't working as well as they used to when I first got them, that's another sign. Just come into the optometrist. It doesn't have to be a year. Sometimes I see my myopia children, within a year, because their glasses aren't as clear as when they started. And so that's a sign of myopia progression. So why are we trying to slow down the progression of myopia? Well, one, we don't want really thick glasses. It's uncomfortable, physically, for the child to have very thick glasses, and they become more and more reliant on the glasses. We also want to decrease the elongation, or that eye getting longer. The reason we want to decrease that or mitigate that is the lining inside the eye, which is called the retina. It gets stretched thinner and thinner the longer the eye grows itself. As it gets stretched thinner and thinner, it becomes more and more delicate, and it can create issues later on in life if that is a very delicate back of the eye. So we try to keep it from getting there. So different myopia management options that we have at the moment. So this is just a list, and we'll get into the details here. So peripheral defocusing glasses is the first one, multifocal soft contact lenses, ortho-K hard contact lenses, atropine eye drops, and then trying to control your environmental factors. So the first one here, so peripheral defocusing glasses and multifocal soft contact lenses. So those two kind of work on the same premise. Research has shown that if we can blur the peripheral vision, it creates a reaction in the back of the eye and the retina for the mid-peripheral retina to avoid it from wanting to get longer, to avoid that eye from wanting to get longer. So what these glasses and contact lenses do is they create central clarity, so your child functions well, they can see centrally, everything is clear so that they can see the board, they can read their books, they can participate in learning. And then in their peripheral vision, it creates a little bit of blur. And so whether it's glasses or contact lenses, or often a combination of both. So I don't like putting children in just contact lenses for hygienic reasons. It's important that a child's eyes, and everyone's eyes, ideally for that matter, adults and children alike, that we're not always in contacts, that we give our eyes a break, and we do wear glasses as well. Often children are in glasses most of the time, and then if they're very active kids, or they play sports, or they're snowboarders or skiers, they like having contacts so that they don't have to worry about trying to fit their glasses on under like a pair of goggles, for example, or trying to keep their glasses on when they're on a soccer field. So both of those are options. Another option is ortho-K. So these are actually rigid contact lenses. So for those of you listening, if you remember those hard little lenses that are usually have a little bit of a blue tint to them, they were a lot more common in the 70s and 80s. These were our first contact lenses. So they're rigid lenses. So what these lenses do, they actually flatten the front of the eye. So if you remember, being nearsighted means that the front of the eye is too steep. So these ortho-K lenses flatten the front of the eye while your child is sleeping. So this is something that your child would wear while they're sleeping. And then in the morning when they wake up, they take these lenses out, and they can be glasses or contact lens free during their school and sports hours. So that's another option that we can also employ. It generally works for kids that are a little bit older because getting a hard lens on the eye requires a little bit more persistence and just better hygiene practices as well, and just remembering to take them out in the morning. And it does mean that your child doesn't have to worry about wearing glasses or contacts throughout the day. So a lot of people do prefer that too, where they just pop them in before bed and then take them out in the morning, and then they've got good vision throughout the day. Atropine eye drops is our next one. So atropine eye drops, what do? So they dilate the pupil a little bit. And again, research has shown this is another way to mitigate myopia, because the atropine stops a muscle from over-focusing. So there's a muscle inside of our eye, and it focuses things up close for us. It controls a lens that basically magnifies things for us. In children that are nearsighted, and have progression at a faster rate than normal, those children actually have almost an overactive muscle in this case. And so atropine slows that, or slows that muscle's capacity to focus on things and over-focus. So that muscle still focuses, they can still read, they're still able to fully participate, but it stops it from kind of overshooting. So, which is one of the things that when it overshoots, when it over-focuses, that's one of the things that causes myopia to progress. And so just, you put these drops in once every day before bedtime. They're prescription drops, so there's something you'd have to go see a doctor of optometry to get prescriptions for. They're compounded, generally speaking. So, in my experience, anyhow, where I work, these drops are only created at certain pharmacies. Not every pharmacy has the capacity to compound drops. So when I prescribe atropine drops, they go to a certain pharmacy, and the pharmacy compounds on a schedule. So they get into the schedule for compounding, and then once they get onto that schedule, I generally like to see my patients every 3 to 6 months, and I make sure they still have enough drops. If they don't, I can always just call the pharmacy and get the prescription renewed. Children are still in glasses on these drops. Sometimes it can create a little bit more light sensitivity because, again, their pupils are just a little bit bigger. So putting them in glasses that are transition lenses, so they become sunglasses when exposed to light, is a comfortable option for children on atropine drops. And then lastly, mitigating your environmental factors. So this includes outdoor play, encouraging outdoor play. So outdoor play generally means that your child is not focusing on things up close. Their eyes are more relaxed. They're looking at things far away. That muscle that is sometimes over focusing up close gets a chance to relax. So generally 90 minutes a day of outdoor play, research has shown, is what's recommended to help control the progression of nearsightedness. Using the 20-20-20 rule. So what is that? I'll go into that in a few slides from now. Limiting our screen time, again, we'll cover that in a few slides. And reading with natural light. So if you can open a window and have your child sit beside a window versus reading under, especially fluorescent lighting, that harsher blue light is a little less comfortable on the eye, causes more strain. And basically go outside is the big one. Like, your kids, obviously, video games are becoming more and more common, but having your child go outside and just play outdoors is great. Again, making sure that they're protected from their UV radiation is important there, but just let them go play outside. So screen time, okay. What's important for screen time in terms of age range? So from ages 0 to 2, we recommend no screen time if possible. Between 2 and 5 years old, about 1 hour a day maximum for recreational use. And then between ages 5 to 18, 2 hours a day is kind of our limit, and that is lots for recreational screen time. Again, with COVID, we've had a lot more online learning, and so this has probably been pushed a little bit more than 2 hours a day. So what's the 20-20-20 rule? So every 20 minutes, you focus on something that's at least 20 feet away for at least 20 seconds. So if your child's doing online learning, even set up a timer that will just, ding every 20 minutes, and just have them look out the window and have them just relax their eyes and have them just focus on something further away. Let that focusing muscle relax. And then when they're ready to come back and look at their screen again, they do need to engage that muscle again, but just giving it periodic breaks. And this is, again, just as important for adults. I tell my adults that are, at a computer all day, I use this rule as well. So it's helpful for adults and children alike. So for those of you that are teachers out there listening, when it's, report card writing time, give your eyes a break. You guys are spending a lot of time, but yeah, if you can remember to employ the 20-20-20 rule, that's a good one for screen tips. And then remembering to blink. So fun fact about blinking when we're looking at things other than screens. So let's say we're just engaging in conversation, we're playing outside, we tend to blink about 12 times a minute. When we look at a screen, it actually goes all the way down to 5, so less than half as often. So one of the most common complaints I have with folks that are on screens all day is, my eyes are so uncomfortable by the end of the day, Nancy. Often it's actually dry eye, and just I assess for that. I put a little bit of stain on the eye to see the dryness, and something as simple as just putting a drop in, every few hours helps with that. Ideally, you just take a break if you can, get up once an hour, go for a coffee break, walk over to the kitchen if you're working from home now, or in your child's case, walk throughout the house, give them a bit of a walking break if they're doing a lot more online learning. So these are fun little cartoons here. So using a quick measurement that we all have available to us, we can use something called the Harmon distance. So that means ensuring that our screens are at least a 4 arms length away. So if we are typing at a computer or a laptop, making sure that our keyboard is at about here, and then a 4 arms length away for the screen there. So the lovely lady in her turquoise chair is demonstrating this well. Monitor being at eye level as well is also helpful for neck strain. And then keyboard at elbow height, and then getting a chair that has good support is just helpful for our body. And then the cartoon here on the right makes fun of kids a little bit. So you can see the little blonde-haired girl, they're just like crawled right into the screen. So ideally we sit on the couch and, in a more comfortable position than the fella using the laptop there. But one of the recommendations I've actually given a lot since COVID started with online learning for kids is, if you can put the screen on the TV and your child can sit on the couch at least 2 to 3 meters away, that gives their eyes a big break too, right? So 1, the screen is usually bigger, and 2, they're further away. So using any screen mirroring, most TVs are what we call smart TVs nowadays, and you can just use the screen mirroring function on any Microsoft computer. I think Apple TV has it too, and you can just literally put what's on the laptop screen, you can move it onto the TV. Your child still sits further away, and that's a really good practice to get into as well. Outdoor time, again, over screen time if we can. Give your child a break if they're doing online schooling. Give them 2 hours of learning on a screen if they need to be on a screen, and then give them some time outside. Just give it a break. And then an hour before bed. So this one is helpful for just our minds calming down and our ability to just slow down and kind of put ourselves mentally in that space of not being overstimulated. Blue light is something that we recommend avoiding if we can, especially before bedtime. Most devices nowadays have that blue light blocking or mitigating factor. It's called I think it's called screen light, or I know Apple has a version of it as well, and it's basically makes everything a little bit more yellow on the screen as we get into the evening hours, and it just helps the eyes relax. But again, if you're working on a computer all day or your child's on a computer all day, you can increase when that increase the saturation of that filter. So if you want it to be on all day, you can actually make the screen more yellow all day for your child, and that again will also help relax their eyes. But ideally, no screens for at least an hour before bedtime. And finally, how do you find one of us? How do you find a Doctor of Optometry? Well, there's a QR code on the screen behind me that you'll see. You can easily scan that, and you will find any optometrist registered in the BCDO, or the British Columbia Doctors of Optometry. You can also use our Find a Doctor tool online, and you can click on that web link there. And again, there's the QR code, so if you want to come find one of us, that's a good spot to do that. And finally, thank you so much for listening. If we were in person, I would be happy to answer any of your questions. But if you do have any questions, again, find a Doctor of Optometry. We're all knowledgeable. We can help out. So thanks so much for listening, everyone. Hopefully that was educational, engaging, and you can help the children in your life, whether you're a teacher, an allied health professional, a mom or a dad, or just the public. Find a child who can benefit from this, and that, in my opinion, would be every child out there. Thanks. Bye.